Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name's Laura Edwards, and I'll be facilitating today's session. I've only recently joined RECO as their PR and events manager, so I look forward to working with you all in the future. For now, there's some housekeeping to note. Firstly, can you just make sure that your cameras, they should automatically be set to camera off and also muted. If you could double check, that would be great. And we're also asking you to ask questions as we go along. You can either do that by raising your hand during each agenda session or by using the Q&A function for general questions that we will look at the end. And then just a polite reminder, please keep your questions relevant and please do avoid referencing other organisations. And then just to note, this meeting is being recorded, but it will be made available later on our website, and you'll also receive a recording link via email. Thank you. So today's session, the main purpose is to provide an overview of the consequential changes and activities that all REC parties need to take in relation to the REC requirements for the half-hourly service that will go live in March 2025. So we've got a very busy agenda today. We've got a lot to get through, and we'll be, as I've said, taking verbal questions after each section. So moving on, I'm very pleased to present the following team to present. So from RECO, we have Jonathan Hawkins, Johnny Moore and Sarah Jones. We'll then move on to representatives from the REC Code Manager, and everyone will be able to give a detailed overview of their areas they're working on and the required changes that you'll need to make. So firstly, I'll be handing over to John Hawkins, who is the Director of Operational Programmes, to introduce today's session. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Laura, and thanks everyone for joining today. Just a brief introduction from me before the team will take you through the detail of each of the aspects of the agenda. And the reason we decided to host this particular webinar is to cover off that there is a, if we could go to the next slide, please, those you'll all be now really into preparation mode for looking at MHHS go live in the next year and starting to be assigned your qualification waves. And the MHHS program, different to other similar industry programs, is being implemented through a phased approach. So that allows those parties that are able to move earlier and want to operate in the MHHS environment at an earlier date to move at a faster pace and to enter that at the point of go live. And those that need to take a little bit longer and want to move into this in a later phase can do so. So everyone's planning for that. You're all being assigned your waves and you will be qualifying and entering that at the point of your readiness. The thing that we wanted to flag is that while overall MHHS readiness may be phased, there are still changes that will happen at MHHS Go Live that will require all parties to prepare for and make changes at that point. And so we wanted to make sure that those were clear, that people were aware of those and that they didn't slip through the cracks and people had those built into their plans. So you'll see on this there, some of you may have seen this before, this is the plan for how the various qualification waves will progress. And then bang in the middle there, you have the current go live range. We have a go live date scheduled for early March at the moment. There is a range that could go up to the beginning of June, but at the moment, it is the March date that's planned. So that's the point there where even if you're in those later qualification waves and deploying into MHHS in early 2026, there will still be changes that will need to be made in potentially March next year that you need to be aware of. So that's the purpose of today. We want to give you an overview of what those changes are and give you an opportunity to understand them, engage, ask questions, and to take what you need to build those into your overall plans. And that's all for me. I'll hand you over to Johnny, who's going to take you through some of the changes to DTN data flows.
Morning all, thanks John. My name is Johnny Moore, and I've been working as the Service Delivery Manager at RECO and MHHS. So I'm just going to talk through a number of changes to RECO and DTC flows that will come live in March 2025 alongside the go live of MHHS. Physical changes to flows are required to a small number of DTC flows, and these are to reflect changes in the MHHS design, or changes implemented through the MHHS design. These are mainly minor amendments to confirm how particular data items should be treated. These add new values to data items to support migration, and also clarify that in MHHS the cumulative register should be used for meter readings taken from smart meters. 2 data flows will need uplifted to new versions, and these are the D303, notification of meter operator supplier metering assets installed, removed by the MOP to the map, and D311, the notification of all supplier information, or the NOSI flow. In addition, due to the introduction of 4 new roles at MHHS, we need to introduce new scenario variants into 36 data flows. And just so we're clear, the new MHHS market roles being created are the Smart Data Service Agent, or the SDS, which has been assigned role code V, the Advanced Data Service Agent, the ADS, which has been assigned role code O, the Smart Meter Equipment Manager, which has been assigned role code S, and the Advanced Meter Equipment Manager, which has been assigned role code T. Move to the next slide, please, Laura. So yeah, we're expecting the DTC changes to be introduced in March 2025, and they will be introduced via the normal release process. Some of you may be aware that Electrolink have already updated the DTS for these changes to allow test flows only for the changes to be sent for MHHS SID testing. And we are expecting a further change to be raised to remove redundant flows and data items at the end of the MHHS migration period, which is currently planned for the 5th of October 2026. The red line versions of the flow changes have been now made available on the REC portal, and there's a link there. There's a new MHHS section which has just gone live this morning, I believe. Next slide, please. So I'll just go through in some level of detail the actual changes that are being made to the data flow. So these are the flows we're expecting actual changes to flows to be made for. So the D139, which is the confirmation of rejection of energization statuses, a new role will be added to clarify that meter readings for smart meters within that are MHHS migrated should relate to the total cumulative register. And that's a change that's been introduced for MHHS. The 149, which is notification of mapping details, currently for NHH, for non-fouling meters. All references in the flow referencing non-fouling will be replaced with traditional metering assets, as the 149 will be used in MHHS for traditional meters only. Similarly, with the 150, the flow name will be amended to traditional meter technical details, and there'll be a new rule within the 150 to indicate that the measurement class will be populated as a null for MHHS MPANs, as the measurement class is no longer a valid data item for MHHS. The D170, which is the request for metering system related details, new values will be added to the J7 item, which is requested action code to support the migration. These new action codes will be 24, which will be used for migrating metering points, and 20 for the change of agent process, and 25, which will be used for migrating metering points through the change of supply process. In addition, a new data item value rule will be added to clarify that the new meter operator ID and the new data collector ID for migration specified events will refer to the Smarter Advanced MEM or the Smarter Advanced Data Service. On the 268, a very small amendment, the D268 will continue to be used for advanced meters in MHHS, and the floor name will be amended to advanced meter technical details. The 300, which is a disputed readings or missing readings and a change of supplier, again, a similar rule added into the 300 to clarify the meter readings for smart meters in MHHS should relate to total cumulative register. And just to clarify, the traditional meters will be sent at register level as of now. The 303, which is the notification meter operator supplier metering assets installed. 2 more significant changes, I think, for the 303. The effective from settlement date Reggie and the manufacturer's make and type will now become optional items within this flow. This is because within MHHS, these items are sent to the MEM from MPRS, and these are now optional items because the MPRS may not have them populated. So the MOP may not have them to be able to populate it. It will be specified in the rules as the current that if the MOP does have them, they should populate them. So we do expect them to populate it the vast majority of the time, but just to be clear that they're now optional items in the flow, or they will be made optional items in the flow. D304 notification of the meter asset provider, new values added again to support migration with the new response code of Q with for migration in progress or completed added. The 311 noisy flow, new rules added to clarify that the profile class of MTC should be null. The LLFC should be populated with the dual tariff ID, which is a new MHHS data item, which is replacing the LLF. EACs will now only be populated for non-MHHS MPANs, as the annual consumption will be available within EAS and other areas. And the TPRs to be provided with the last actual reading to clarify mapping of previous metering setup in the event of switch redispute. Due to these changes, the flow version will be updated to version 2. And lastly, the 312, which is a notification of meter information to MPAS, a new value will be added to the MOP with flow response code, again to indicate when a forward migration is in progress or completed. If you move to the next slide, please, Laura. This is just an indicator. I won't go through all of this, but it's an indicator of all the flows where we're expecting new scenario variance. As I say, there is a number where new SVs have been added to reflect the new data services and the new metering service that have been added. And as you click to the next slide, it's just the rest of these with new scenario variants. That's the end of the quick overview of the DTC changes. As I say, the red line versions will be made available on the portal if you want to go and have a look. But if there are any immediate questions, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Johnny.
And yes, I can confirm the slides will be shared after the meeting.
I can't see any hands raised at the moment. I'll give it a couple of seconds, see if anybody wants to ask anything. Thank you. Okay, if we haven't got any questions in that case, we'll move over to Sarah Jones, who's next to present.
I think one question's just come into the chat.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, okay, I'll cover that. Yeah, so the within MHHS, an annual consumption, a monthly annual consumption will be made available via Elexon services, Salmon services. That will be displayed within EES and also be available in the EES API, which we'll cover in a bit more detail later. The EAC will continue to be used for traditional or non-migrated MPANs until they're migrated. So your normal TPI access, how you normally get EAC will continue, but if you've got access to EES, yes, then your consumption will be available for migrated MPANs when they migrate from March next year.
Yeah, I think we've got another question in the main chat asking if there are any plans to amend the D0002 flow to include J codes.
There's no current amendments to the D2 that we're aware of. If you think any are required, please go through the normal change process, but there's not any MHHS specific changes to the fault process as of now.
Thank you. I think that's it for questions. So moving over to Sarah.
Thanks, Laura. And good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sarah Jones, and I'm part of the MHHS RECCO team. So this section focuses on the impacts on the switching arrangements, and moving through to the first slide, this really highlights, if we can move to the next slide, sorry. This slide really highlights the point that from a REC perspective, there's no change to the switching arrangements. So supplier interactions with CSS that are governed under the REC will remain the same, and there's no changes to the interfaces for suppliers and agents and maps to communicate with the CSS. So the only changes in this area are based on the indirect impacts as a result of changes to the processes governed under the BSE. So this is shown on the slide with references to the new DIP messages that are issued by the SMRS. So when a pending switch notification is received in, a DIP IF002 is issued out to parties, and when a secured active notification is received into the registration service, then a DIP IF001 is sent to parties. But from a REC perspective, all of the provisions around CSS communications are unchanged. So moving on to the next slide, whilst the switching process itself isn't changing, there are some indirect impacts linked to the supplier exceptions processes that are set out within the consumer facing switching and billing schedule. So that's schedule 30 of the REC. So as part of the REC consequential change activities, a review has been carried out on that CFSB schedule, and this has identified impacts on the switch meter read provisions and the application of both the switch meter read and the erroneous switch processes. So in terms of the applicability point, so with both the erroneous switch process and the switch meter read exceptions process, they currently explicitly limit the application to the non-half hourly metering points. In reviewing this, and we discussed it with the MHHS Stakeholder Advisory Group, it was agreed that this restriction should be removed in its entirety, and that would align to the other processes that are within the CFSB schedule. So therefore, where either a supplier initiates an erroneous switch exception or a switch meter read in dispute, they are required to do so in accordance with the process set out within the schedule, unless there's a bilateral agreement with the other impacted supplier. So in terms of the wider changes on the CFSB schedule, these relate solely to the switch meter read and exceptions processes. The agreement of the switch meter reading is set out within the MHHS design, and that will be captured within the BSE. So this is referred to as the transfer read, and it's focused on the transfer between an old data service and a new data service, rather than being linked directly to a change of supplier scenario. But from a REC perspective, this new transfer process has knock-on impacts into the switch meter read exceptions process defined under the REC. So the process itself is not changing. Suppliers will still use the D300 flow to raise and respond to disputes or missing reads. The changes focus on the triggers for the disputes to be raised. So with the current process, there's a differentiation between DCC enrolled and non-DCC enrolled meters. Under MHHS, there's a new standard timeline around the transfer of reads for smart and traditional metering assets, which require the reads to be agreed and, if not estimated, within 5 working days. So the new process set out within the REC requires the exceptions or missing read dispute to be raised within 10 working days. It's been noted that consumers can still raise disputes up to 12 months after the switch. So clarification has been agreed and added within the schedule to confirm that where there is erroneous data that's been agreed through this process, it will need to be corrected within consumer bills, even if that data cannot be corrected within settlement due to the reduced settlement timescales. So the final change referenced on the slide is the new enumeration, which has been added to the D10. So the D10 is used to pass the meter reading data from the supplier to the data service, and there's new enumeration been added within this for use within this flow that will identify any reads that have been agreed through the switch meter read exceptions process. So that was the scope of the changes around the switch and the supplier exception processes. So I'll pause there if there's any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. And we've got one in the chat from Kirsty. Oh, and a second one from Mark in the main chat function.
Yeah, so are the exception processes applicable to non-migrated? So no, the changes are only for non-migrated MPANs. So within the drafting that's been agreed through through the CCAG route, there is a clear differentiation. It refers to for non-migrated metering points, this is the situation, and then for migrated metering points, it's the other situation. So no, it is just for migrated metering points. On the second point, how is settlement volume going to be reallocated? So the discussions that we've had around the final reconciliation point sort of concluded that from a REC perspective, the agreement is around agreeing the data for consumer billing. The expectation is that parties will correct that where they can do if it's pre-final reconciliation. If it's after final reconciliation, then there's no direct route to change that within settlement, and suppliers would need to consider whether the issue was material enough to take down the trade and dispute route. But that would be a consideration under the BSE rather than under the REC. And I think, can you share a link to show the differences? I'm not quite sure what that means, but if it's a link to the drafting, then that's fine. We can share the link to all of the relevant code drafting as part of the response to this.
Thank you, Sarah. We've got a further question in the Q&A.
Can you read it out? Sorry, I can't.
Yeah, okay. So will the MHHS DTC go live on the 7th of March 2025 impact or replace the February 2025 industry release go live that would normally take place 1 week before that?
It's a good question. Need to definitely confirm that. I think there is a change freeze at the moment, so there'll be limited changes going through in the November and February. So I suspect there won't be any changes that would be applied to the DTC within the February release. It wouldn't be sensible, but we can take that offline and confirm afterwards.
Thank you. And then a further question from Chris Berry. So does allowing a supplier to decide this mean that customers might lose money?
No, so I think that's the point of the clarification within the REC schedule. So it's very clear that suppliers need to ensure that consumers are correctly billed. So any erroneous data that results from a switch meter read dispute and an agreed read being amended will need to be reflected within consumer bills. The point I think that people are raising is that suppliers won't necessarily be able to make that change through to settlement. As I say, there is a trade and dispute mechanism under the BSE that can enable significant or material changes to be managed, but that's a conversation for the BSE and around the movement of the final reconciliation.
Thank you. I think that's all questions on that agenda item, so thank you. And then I'll be moving over to Harriet Truss.
I'm Harriet Truss from the REC Code Manager working in the change team. I'll take you through the changes to the supply number format. Laura, if you want to bob on to the next slide. So the supply number format changes were initially progressed as a REC consequential change, similarly to some of the other things that we've talked about already today. But following a consultation under that work, there was no clear consensus on the preferred approach for these changes. So it went through the full REC change process. We looked at different options. There was an alternative change proposal as well, and that was an authority determined change and resulted in the approval of R83, which was to amend the top line of the supply number format. So the supply number is something obviously that needs to go on all the customer bills or an annual statement once a year where there isn't a bill being issued, and the format for that supply number is prescribed in the data specification, hence the REC change. The MHHS design has impacted the data items in the top line of the supply number. So essentially the profile class ID is only being retained for the traditional meters, and the meter time switch code and line loss factor configuration ID are both redundant under the MHHS processes. So R83, there's like with all the changes, there's a specific page, and the legal drafting, there's a link specifically there to the legal drafting. But in terms of the new format, the profile class is retained. The meter time switch code is replaced with the standard settlement configuration ID, and the line loss factor configuration ID is replaced with the GEOS tariff ID. And as mentioned earlier by Johnny, that's kind of almost a like switch in the data set that's with that one. The implementation is alongside all of the other go live code drafting changes, and it's for all MPANs from that moment. So we're looking at March 25. So any bills from that point forward need to use the new format at the point that bill or annual statement would have been issued. There's no need to issue something immediately after that point, out of cycle with anything already happening. If you bob on to the next slide. Thank you. So at the bottom of this slide is the new supply number format. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that format. So from a structural kind of point of view, it's very much the same, and it is a swap out of the data items apart from the profile class ID. Obviously we have a period of transition, so the same supply number format will be used for migrated and non-migrated MPANs. So there is a guidance document on the change proposal page, and I've kind of pulled a bit of the information out of there. For all MPANs, there's nothing changing for the bottom line, so that just continues as currently. For the non-migrated MPANs, profile class continues to be populated as currently. For the standard settlement configuration ID, that's populated from the existing valid set. And for the GEOS tariff ID, you need to populate from the LLFC ID valid set. And then for the migrated MPANs, continue to populate for profile classes 2 and 4, and then populate with zeros for any MPANs where there isn't a profile class. And for the standard settlement class, similarly, that can be populated for traditional meters, but anywhere where it doesn't apply, populate with zeros. And then from the GEOS tariff ID, that'll be populated from that new valid set, as mentioned, similar to the LLFC ID valid set. So that was everything I was going to cover off. Are there any questions?
Yeah. Okay, and we've got one in the Q&A chat from Paul Bedford. So why is PC retained?
So the profile class is retained for the traditional meters because the half-hourly data won't be isn't coming through from those meters. So it's that the options are still there for that profiling for settlement.
I can't see any more questions in the chat. I can't see any raised hands either. Give it a couple of seconds if anyone's. Oh, got a question just come through. So is it possible to retrieve from ECO-ES data for PC and MTC?
So I might defer to a colleague in a minute, but generally, so the changes to the data items and their availability for migrated MPANs is dependent on the kind of the MHHS design. So if those data items are available anyway, then they'll be populated in EES. That will then be reflected. They'll then be available for the supply number. So if there is a data item for profile class, if it is there, it will be in EES. But if it's not relevant to an MHHS migrated MPAN, it wouldn't be available. Just also, well, there was one question that we had in advance around the availability of the supply number in EES, and that is EES is being updated to reflect the new, where it holds that format on the web portal, it will reflect what has been approved under R83. I don't, does that answer the question? In terms of the data items, what's been put into EES, Johnny's going to cover off later on in the webinar.
We've got another question coming in. Oh, we've got a few coming in now. So if other parties use to fill MPAN details, is this change mandated, or does this only apply to suppliers?
Harriet, do you want me to come in and
I was going to say,
answer and
I think
cover
that's
this?
more to the data items themselves than the supply number. So, sorry, go on.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to cover some of this in the in some later slides on EES. But just to be clear, that the profile class, the SSC, are being maintained within MHHS and are mandatory on traditional metering only. For smart and advanced metering, they're not required to be populated. With the MTC is no longer a valid item within MHHS and won't be populated at all. So the profile class and the SSC will be available where populated, and they're mandatory only for traditional metering, if that helps.
Yeah, and then we've got a few other ones in the Q&A. So we've got, yeah.
For migration, what is the last date by which EES data can be retrieved? I'm going to defer to Johnny on that one as well. But the EES changes, which we'll go through later, as I say, will be effective from go live. For non-migrated MPANs, the data will remain available till they're migrated, and then obviously afterwards, then the migrated MPANs will reflect the new data items.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then I will defer to Johnny on the mapping of the IDs.
Sorry, Laura.
Will there be a
mapping of
Q&A?
Let's see.
Yeah, I think it's yes, I think that's the LFCs are being picked up within the ISD, which is managed by the BSC. So there will be mapping available as part within the ISD tables. But as I said, it's a BSC requirement to do that. From a rec point of view, the GWAS IDs will be made available within EES and populated within the top line.
And then we've got the final question. Mark Trainer. So why is PC 2 out of 4 remained full migrated?
Yeah, I think Harriet picked this up before, but profile class is being maintained so that for traditional MPANs in particular, you can identify whether it's a single rate or multi-rate.
And then another question comes through. So you could derive MTC from PC and SSC, but it wouldn't be hosted in EES as not needed in the new world. More of a comment.
Yeah, so again, I covered that one before. Yeah, that the data items will be available for the non-migrated MPANs from go live. So non-migrated MPANs, the relevant data items will be available. For migrated MPANs, the new data item setup will be available. Thanks, Paul.
Cheers, Paul. I think there is some additional slides on the SSC TPR mapping going forward, and also on EES. So it might be worth picking up any other points after we've gone through that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Harriet and Johnny, for the support on the questions. So we're now moving on to Ryan Dale.
Yep, good afternoon, just about. So Ryan Dale, part of the REC Technical Services, to talk you through the new meter configuration table. If we could move on to the next slide. So during discussions, part of Microwide Half Hourly Stakeholder Advisory Group, suppliers highlighted the need to maintain on an ongoing basis some MDD data, market domain data relating to SSC and TPR to support retail activities. So to that end, we've introduced a metering configuration tables if you like, which will be hosted within EMAR or the Digital Navigator, so the REC repository for digital information. And we have a live Category 3 change proposal live now, which we encourage any feedback on. The link for that is on the slide there, and obviously will be sent to you as part of the slide deck provision. That's live until the 26th of July, and we're seeking feedback on a number of aspects to it, not least the format of those tables. So there are 4 tables in total, and the proposed format at this stage is for them to be provided as CSV, could additionally be provided as SQL fairly easily. In terms of how we manage any potential changes to the tables, they're currently managed within the BSC under the SVG arrangements, and similarly they would be managed under the REC via the technical change route, with the governance sitting with the metering expert panel to make any decisions on a cyclical basis. And as I mentioned, the consultation on the meter configuration table formats and the approach to it is live until the 26th of July 2024. So please do take a look at that change and provide any feedback that you may have on it. Next slide, please. So a little bit more information. The hosting of the table within EMAR and Digital Navigator will begin around MHHS milestone 8, which is March 2025. We are in engagement with Elexon about the transition for that, and we've got a number of steps underway in terms of how data that remains within MDD that isn't coming over is to be managed from a BSC point of view, and obviously from a REC point of view, how we plan to manage that information too. It's expected that the data that's within the configuration table will be subject to a monthly review at the metering expert panel, and an occasional change may be necessary to those tables. We don't expect there to be a large volume of change. In the existing state, the table and the data within them isn't changed regularly, but there is a provision there to manage that change. As I said, change will be managed by the technical change route with governance at MEP. And REC parties will be able to propose changes leading to an impact assessment, and any received comments or will be considered an appropriate sign-off would be undertaken on a monthly basis by the metering expert panel. So that's the proposed approach, fairly straightforward, I hope, approach to maintaining this data set for REC parties. And I think on the next slide is just an example of the data tables that we're seeking to host. So currently MDD entities 27, 29, 32 and 38. That was all. Any questions at all?
Thank you, Ryan. I don't think we've got any questions come through at the moment.
Well, a final plug for the Category 3 change that's available, so you're welcome to use that as a feedback mechanism also.
I think we've got one just come through now on the Q&A.
I think in answer to David Morley's question, I don't think it's necessarily a duplicate resource. It's just an open set of tables that parties can use to reference against. It may well be that there's a you sort of referred to in two different ways, but my understanding is that the configuration table is that ISD data. And then a question from Mark. I'm not sure if this is relevant to these slides or perhaps the previous presentation, but it's regarding profile classes dictating single or multi-rate. I would suggest that's it could be relevant to the previous presentation regarding the top line.
We've just had one through from Angelos at the top of the list there.
Okay, I can't quite see that one at the moment. Could you
So is there an indefinite activity or temporary post go live? I had thought that PC and SSC would be retained for 5 years after MHHS go lives to support legacy activity.
Yes, that's a good point actually, and I agree. There is a provision for the MDD data to be maintained for that period. As I mentioned, there's almost a dual hosting that will take place. The tables mentioned hosted within the rec and subject to any potential changes, and obviously the legacy tables will remain in a frozen state with the BSC. John, I understand. Do you want us to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. It was just to really clarify what you just said, Ryan. So all MDD data is going to be frozen for 5 years, which means the latest version at the point of MHH go live will be there, but won't be subject to further change control. The question that got asked when we did this in the design with industry is there a requirement to continue to maintain a valid set for SSCs and TPRs going forward to aid in industry mapping where an SSC is set, particularly both on traditional meters, but also it's optionally set for smart metering? And the answer was yes. It was also that at the moment, the MDD data stores this as a valid set at a DNO level, and it was agreed that it was no longer required at that level. There would be a single national set that would set out the valid set of SSCs and TPRs that could be used by suppliers to identify the tariff that they've configured on their smart meter, or as they do with traditional today, the equivalent SSC for the configuration of that meter. So the valid set will be there historically for historic purposes, because you'll still have that for pre-migrated MPANs for the period, and potentially for looking back on other things for audit purposes. But in terms of maintaining the valid set going forward from MHHS migration, that won't be an ISD. That has been put into the rec because it deliberately wasn't carried over to ISD. It was just going to disappear. So it will be there, and then you will have the ability to propose new, remove old, etc. SSCs, TPRs via the change process Ryan flagged up earlier going forwards.
Thanks, John. I can see one more question came in. Yeah. Is that right? From Hashada. So yeah. In future, after migration, there is possibility that PC and SSC may not be available in this situation. How do we identify MTC? It's a good question. I'm not entirely sure of the answer. I don't know if anyone else on the call knows the answer to that one. I think it might again be slightly linked to the top line question or presentation prior. Any thoughts?
You want me to put it on camera a second? So I think it's just a flag that it's just a flag that the MTC isn't an MHHS item. The MTC will no longer exist in MHHS. So there's no design on the MTC, so that's as part of that of MHHS design, and that's what we're replicating within the rec. But as I said, the profile class SSC are being maintained as suppliers have asked for them for traditional metering, and that again is gone for the MHHS design. They're optional for smart and advanced, but the MTC is being removed as a data item in MHHS.
Thanks, Johnny.
Yeah, there's one final question from David Morley. So is there a consultation live on the meter config tables?
Yes, there is. The links are available on the slides. It's also available under the category 3 changes of the REC portal under the change section. So please feel free to visit there. It's called meter configuration tables or table. So please do visit and provide any input. Thank you.
Ryan, I think that's all for questions. So now moving over back to Sarah Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So the next few slides cover the new processes that are being introduced to support MHHS migration. So this is the movement of individual metering points from non-MHHS arrangements into the new MHHS settlement arrangements. So this element of the MHHS design is applicable to both MHHS qualified suppliers and agents, and also to legacy suppliers and agents who have not been in MHHS qualified. So all participants will need to update systems and processes to reflect the design to some extent ahead of MHHS go live. So the full details of the migration processes are defined within the MHHS design, and they'll be tested through the MHHS programme SIT testing. From a REC perspective, we've introduced we'll be introducing a new schedule which sets out the MHHS migration arrangements, and then there's an equivalent BSEP that's been introduced under the BSE. So because migration includes both MHHS qualified suppliers and agents and also non-MHHS qualified suppliers and agents, there are elements of the design which everybody needs to comply with at the start of the migration period. So they're not part of MHHS qualification itself, because MHHS qualification is delivered in waves throughout the migration period. So in other words, suppliers must be MHHS qualified under both REC and BSE in order to start migrating metering points, but all parties are required to introduce the changes to their systems and processes ahead of MHHS go live to support the migration and reverse migration. So this first slide details the 3 different migration business processes. So we have migration as part of a change of supplier, migration through change of agent where there is no change of supplier activity, and reverse migration where a non-MHHS qualified supplier registers a metering point that has already been MHHS migrated. We expect the majority of suppliers will migrate metering points outside of the switch process to minimise complexity and to meet the migration timescales, given the number of metering points that need to be migrated within the migration period. So we anticipate the change of agent scenario to be the main business process that's used during migration. In this scenario, an MHHS qualified supplier would initiate a supplier agent, their supplier agent appointments using the DIP interfaces, and those DIP interfaces have specific migration event codes. The SMRS, the registration service, will recognise that an MHHS migration is occurring, and then they will issue a D170 to the losing meter operator to trigger the sharing of MTDs. So that differs from the BAU activities where it's usually the gaining meter operator that requests the MTDs. Following that, migration then progresses as part of the standard MHHS BAU appointment process. So where a forward migration is progressed as part of a change of supplier event, so the middle business process on the slide, the process is slightly different. So where the SMRS receives a pending switch notification relating to a non-migrated metering point, then and the gaining supplier is MHHS qualified, then the SMRS will send both the legacy DTN messages to the gaining supplier and also the new DIP interfaces to the IF 002. And that allows the supplier to choose whether they want to migrate the metering point as part of the switch or leave it till a separate time. So if the supplier chooses to migrate the metering point, then they'll issue the appointment notifications through the DIP, and again that will trigger the sending of the D170 from the SMRS out to the losing agent, which again triggers the sending of MTDs, similar to the migration with change of agent process. So the other element on the slide around the migration design is reverse migration. So this was introduced in recognition of the phased qualification approach. So only a small number of suppliers will be qualified at the start of MHHS migration, with qualification continuing in waves across the first 12 months of migration. So where a customer chooses to switch to a supplier who's not MHHS qualified, but the metering point is already has already been migrated, then the reverse migration process is triggered. And the SMRS will communicate with the gaining supplier via the legacy DTN messages, while sending notifications to the losing supplier and losing agents via the DIP. And that results in the legacy data being reinstated and the metering point being reinstated as a non-migrated metering point. So moving on to the next slide, picks up some more detail on the specific changes. So the first point was covered on the previous slide and also flagged within Johnny's slide. So a key change to the process is that a meter operator on a change of agent, change of supply, will receive a D170 from the SMRS, and that should trigger the sending of MTDs. MTDs themselves are still sent in the same way, with the D149 and 150 for traditional and the D268 for advanced metering assets. And as Johnny mentioned, there's additional enumerations been included within that message to identify the message as either a migration change of agent or migration change of supplier notification. So the second point on the slide relates to the meter operator appointment message. So the D155, where a reverse migration is taking place. So there have been changes made to that message that will identify to the agent that it's going through a reverse migration, so that they're aware. The third slide, the third element is around the meter read transfer process. So the actual detail of transferring meters on migration is set out within the BSE provisions. So the REC really focuses on the MTD transfer, but included it here just for information, and just to highlight. So the D10 and the D86 will continue to be used to share meter data, meter read data, and again, there's additional enumerations been included there to identify where there's forward and reverse migration. It's probably worth highlighting that there are a number of changes to BSE-owned DTN flows, in addition to the ones that Johnny went through earlier for the REC, and they're all detailed within the MHHS website. The last two bullets on this slide link to specific issues relating to reverse migration. So the first one covers reverse migration of smart metering assets. So under the MHHS design, smart MOAs are not required to share MTDs via the DTN, because all of the required data is held centrally within SMRS. So where a smart metering asset is reverse migrated, then there's an additional process that's required, and this is where the smart MOA, so this is to do with the MHHS qualified MOA, so they will create a skeleton D150, and they will send that to the gaining supplier and the gaining meter operator. And at that point, the gaining supplier and the gaining meter operator, who are not MHHS qualified, will need to take on some additional activities in order to generate the D150 and the 149. So the supplier will send a D367 to the MOA, which sets out the required tariff information, and that allows the gaining meter operator to create the 149 and 150, and allow that onward submission then towards the data collector and the DNO. And then the final point on this slide is similar in terms of reverse migration position for advanced metering assets. So the expectation is that the majority of advanced meter assets will reverse migrate into the half-hourly market, but there is still provision for suppliers to determine that they would like the metering point to be settled as non-half hourly. So where this scenario arises, the supplier would instruct the gaining MOA, so again the non-qualified MOA, transform the MTDs that they've received via the D268 into a D140, 149 and a D313. And they'll then use those to issue onwards to, again, the data collector and DNO. So moving on to the final slide, this really calls out some additional validation that will be implemented within MPRS. So the validation rules themselves will be defined within the BSE, but we've included them on here just for completeness, because it's important for REC parties to be aware of the rules that can potentially prevent updates from being made whilst the migration process is going through. So I won't go into each of the points. I think Johnny highlighted some of them in terms of the enumerations on specific messages. But basically there are a number of updates that will be rejected from by MPRS if they're issued whilst a forward migration is already going through, and therefore there's been some additional reason codes added to those rejection messages to support that. So that was everything on the design. Anton and Dan are going to talk a bit more about some of the assurance processes later. So I'll just pause there, see if there's any questions on the design elements.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we've got a question from John Green. So where SMRS has sent the DO170, or the new MHHS agent has sight of who the old agent was?
I'd need to take that away, unless anyone on the call can answer that one directly. I need to double check that one. I believe not, and I think that's something they would need to find out if they didn't get the MTDs. But I can confirm that after the meeting.
Thank you. We've got another question. So is there a list of which suppliers will be MHHS compatible from the start date?
So the MHHS qualification will go through in waves. When parties are and parties, suppliers and agents, as they're MHHS qualified, then they will be that information will be publicly available. So it will be available to know as and when parties are qualified. But as I said, they won't all be qualified at the start. So so that will be updated as we go through the various waves.
Okay, we've got a question here for customers, about the customers. So if they've signed a 5-year contract with a Pacific MOP provider for the MOP services and a 5-year deal with a Pacific DC provider for data collection, will the appointed MOP and appointed DC be able to object to any different MOP and or DC appointing themselves in the same way a new supplier can be objected to? Is this now going to be possible for MOPs and DCs? Quite a long question there.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the customer appointed agent piece, we understand this is something that's being considered, or there's been queries raised within the MHHS programme. So obviously the expectation would be that the relevant meter operators and data collectors would, well, and the meter operators and then the new data services would be qualified so that they could be appointed through migration. And I think the position, if they're not qualified, and the supplier needs to meet its migration targets to move meter points away, suppliers should be talking to the agents direct to deal with any issues around customer direct agent appointments.
Thank you. And we've got a hand raised from Halima Majaji. I don't know if they're able to come off mute. Okay, do you want to come in and ask your question?
They've said it's a mistake.
Oh, it was a
So,
mistake.
carry on.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, we'll go back to the chat. Okay, so you've got one with echoes should show MAP history, so that's a comment. I think that's it for questions.
Yeah, I think
that
that's the position that you'd be able to look through the EES, but I wanted to just double check that it's not available through any messages. So we'll confirm after the meeting.
Oh, I think we've just had we've just had a supplementary here. So I am assuming they are qualified. My point is that DCs are constantly being pushed out, and they shouldn't be. So that was a follow on from Chris Berry's question about the 5-year contracts around MAP services.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's probably not one that we can comment on here. As I say, I think there's conversations around customer direct contracts that are sort of through the program, but certainly when it comes around to data collectors, that's under the BSE. So so I think that would be a conversation for the BSE.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, that's the end of that section. And now we're moving on to Anton Moden.
Thanks very much. So I'm Anton. I work in the Rec Code Manager, focusing on performance assurance. I guess just as a slight change of pace, we've been doing lots of what. I just wanted to talk about why briefly. So I really want to acknowledge there's a lot of change going on at the moment, and MHHS has significant changes here and under other codes. I do acknowledge that further performance assurance work does increase some of the work that you will have to do. However, this is really important stuff. We're all invested in this market operating. When problems happen, they cause problems for consumers and they cause problems for each other. And both of those things are really important to prevent and to respond to if they happen. So in thinking about this, thinking about MHHS, we've identified 3 key activities which are driven by really that goal of things going as smoothly as possible. The first one is thinking about legacy assurance and qualification. We really want people to be ready before they operate in the market, to make sure there aren't mistakes and other people aren't having to be on the other end of confusing messages or problems, and that things can be as smooth as possible. So all of the qualification work that we will cover in a second some details of, that's really there to try and ensure as smooth an operation as possible throughout that transition period. We're also looking at migration and early life support. These are one-off activities that will only happen during that window. I think it's quite important that we keep an eye on them and check that they're working and intervene if there is an issue, so that we can again keep things as smooth as possible for consumers and for you. The final thing that's important is we don't think these processes or these purposes and outcomes really are new. These are significant changes, definitely, but a lot of the things around metering, around switching, switch meter reads, they're things that pre-existed that we needed to make sure works. They're things that we need to make sure work in the transition, and they're things that we will need to have an enduring approach to make sure these new arrangements continue to be effective. So we'll be thinking about that and changes to information required to see that they are working in the longer term. Obviously, we'll adapt our strategy based on real performance. Ideally, things go smoothly and we can kind of dial things down a little bit, but we need to be thoughtful in that space. So I just want to hand over to some of my colleagues who've been spending a lot of time thinking and developing in these areas to talk you through specifically what we're doing. So if I hand over to Daniel now.
Cool. Thank you, Anton. So as mentioned, I'm Daniel from the Code Manager, and I'm going to talk about the assurance activities we're going to be completing to ensure that legacy or existing suppliers and meter operator mowers have made the changes required under REC to prepare for the MHHS cutover. So the scope of this activity includes some of the changes we've already discussed today, such as the changes to the supply number format and the changes to the DTN. The RECPAB has approved a three-phase plan for this legacy change assurance. The first step is the information gathering phase. So for parties that will complete MHHS qualification testing, you'll have already included this information in your pre-qualification submission about how you're going to be preparing for this cutover, such as the scale of changes you're making, project timeframes, and how you're monitoring the risks for the delivery of these changes. Additionally, for SIT parties, we sent a request for information, or RFI, for you to provide similar details on your plans to deliver these changes. So that was the first step. Secondly, the REC Code Manager will perform an assessment over the risks to these change delivery plans, and where we identify the need for any additional information or assurance, we may issue self-assessments or action plans for parties to complete to manage these risks to their delivery. So additionally, this is going to be a bit of a sort of iterative process. We're expecting to take place between August and November of this year. And we have taken on board the feedback from previous MHHS submissions and will be providing positive feedback on the submissions if we, for example, don't require any further information. So thirdly, we're also going to require a declaration from each party between December of and February of next year, confirming that the changes you need to implement for this MHHS cutover are on track and that there are no undisclosed residual risks to being able to deliver those changes in time to support the MHHS cutover. This assertion will need to be signed by a director as per Companies House or an assigned delegate, in line with current REC processes. So that's the high level plan, and we will be providing further details on each of these stages as we do progress with the specific activities. But at this point, I'm happy to open the floor to any questions on this legacy change assurance process that we've just sort of outlined.
Don't think, no, we've not had any questions come through so far. Give it a few more seconds.
Well, if anyone does think of any questions, I think we've got a question.
Here we go, we've got one. So is the declaration for both SIT and non-SET-IT parties?
It will be for both SIT and non-SIT parties, absolutely. The reason for that as well, so obviously it needs to be for non-SIT parties, since there will be that transition period where, for instance, you might not have completed your MHHS qualification, but obviously the cutover will have happened. And that is the same for SIT parties as well. I appreciate for the MVC, obviously they will have completed the qualification, but if you're in the SIT non-MVC, you might not have completed the qualification at the time of cutover, hence why we're asking all relevant parties to submit it.
Thank you. We've got another question. So if we make that declaration, we can make it regarding progress and programme. But what about other changes such as 4G comms or background systematic changes, e.g. new billing engine?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the scope of what we're going to be asking you to declare, it's the scope of essentially all of the code changes which are going to be coming in as part of M8. So if, for example, you're making any further consequential changes or any other changes to background processes which you feel may hinder your obligation to be able to meet hinder your ability to be able to meet your REC obligations, then that's the type of thing you should be disclosing to us. And I'm happy to have any bilateral conversations with any individual parties if they want to discuss some of the other changes that are going on and how that might impact their ability to meet REC obligations.
Thank you, Daniel. I think that's questions on that section. So now moving over to Nervias.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Nervias. I work for the Code Manager, focusing on the data side of performance assurance. What I'll be talking through on the next slide is REC data cleanse activities and the interactions with the MHHS program. So on the next slide, please. The REC operates data cleanse as part of its BAU performance assurance. This is separate from the cleanse activity of the MHHS program. Our cleanse activity is grouped into 3 different areas. So sprint is where we set data cleanse targets that are approved by the REC PAB for parties to deliver. Then there's a second grouping, which is track, where we share our data cleanse reports with parties, and these these should be addressed in line with the published data guidelines that we have. And then there's a third category, which is a watching brief, where we continue to provide these reports and share them with parties, but they're not actively considering them. This cleanse activity forms part of the performance assurance operating plan, or the PAOP, that's managed by the REC PAN. We do consider under our data cleanse sprints, which is our main focus here, what reports should be prioritized to reflect any REC related program risks, or to prioritize cleansing that could benefit the MHHS program. As an example, in Sprint 2, we prioritize the energized no MSN report to support REC parties. For reference, this is the report looks at energized MPANs with no meter serial number that's present. These need to be investigated and then resolved. In the timeline below that I've got as part of my example, I just want to talk through that the Sprint 2 commenced back in March 24, and following a mid-sprint review, the PAB approved the performance assurance techniques, or the PATs, for parties that had not made any significant or sufficient progress. The Sprint 2 is to be concluded in September 24, and we request all parties to review their progress and ensure that they are on track to meet their targets. And then finally, looking forward, Sprint 3, our data cleanse Sprint 3 will commence in September or October 24. What we are considering is prioritizing reports related to meter technical details, or meter technical detail population activity that the MHHS program is expected to complete around that time. For additional information, these include things like the Energy Smart Meter ID, ESME ID, meter location, and a number of registered digits. Before each data cleanse sprint, we do engage with the REC issues group, or the RIG, and that's your opportunity to be able to understand the proposed reports that we would like to take forward, and also to input into the data cleanse activities. Our initial proposals for Sprint 3 were presented at the July RIG meeting last week. Just as a final note to this, just wanted to add that other data cleanse activities that are scheduled and managed by the MHHS program are outside of the scope of the REC performance assurance activities. That was the end of that slide, so I can take any questions on that. If not, I'm happy to move on to the park changes. Just wait a second.
Questions just come through. So, is there an escalation process for data cleanse activity? We have engaged with agents for any identified meter points, but do not seem to be making progress.
So, so as part of progress, or or potentially lack of progress, parties can approach us directly as the code managers so we can understand the progress or the obstacles that they're facing. But we do encourage parties to attend the REC issues group, or the RIG, to be able to raise that. So that gives parties an opportunity to actually raise any obstacles that they have, and also provides other members of the industry to provide their any evidence or any sort of experience they have in managing those blockers. So it's effectively like a collaboration space.
Thank you. No other questions come through, so I'll move over to the next slide.
The next slide talks about park updates. So what I'll be talking about is, so as part of the code manager's activities, we monitor performance. We monitor performance of areas that pose a risk to the market. The Performance Assurance Catalogue, or the PARC, lists the reports that we request from central bodies or parties to measure performance against code obligations that are defined in our risk register. To monitor processes that are introduced or amended by the MHS program, what we're going to do is develop new reporting requirements. We expect these requirements to impact the DIP manager, the CSS provider, the Electricity Inquiry Service, the ESS provider, meter operator agents, MOAs, and the distribution network operators, the DNOs. The data requests for these new requirements will be captured in the PARC, so it will need to be updated. The change process to update the park will follow the normal category 2 change process, and that will allow for all REC parties and service providers to provide input. The new reporting is expected to be delivered from the start of the MHHS migration, so that's M11, and that's to ensure that performance assurance monitoring is in place from go live. At the bottom of the slide, I've just got a high-level timeline that I've set out below for the change. So in August 2024, the development work is started on the reporting requirements. That's where we're working with the REC PAB, the DIP manager, as well as representatives from REC parties and service providers to develop the reporting requirements. And then from August to November 24, that will be the category 2 change process itself, so where the formal consultation will take place. Like I mentioned, that will provide parties and service providers opportunity to provide input. And then finally, in April 25, like I mentioned, will be the implementation of the new reporting requirements that will be aligned up with Go Live for M11. Was there any questions on park updates?
Nothing's come through. We'll just give it a couple of seconds. If anybody wishes to raise their hand as well.
No.
One just come through. So when will the REC change be raised?
I said that'll be August, end of August. So the change process will start from end of August to November 24.
I think that no more questions come through. So now moving back to Johnny Moore for the final item on our agenda before the Q&A.
Thank you. I'm just going to go through some changes to the EES. We covered a lot of this in a seminar last year, but I think pretty worthwhile going through it. So the EES will need a change due to MHHS provisions in the following ways. So as we talked about quite a lot through this seminar, there is some new and amended data items and removed data items as part of MHHS. There's a number of new user roles which we need to reflect in the system. EES is moving to an event-driven architecture. Currently, it gets an update via MPRS overnight. In the new world, it will receive updates via the DIP as data items are changed. And there's also changes required to ensure that the forward and reverse migration between legacy and MHHS arrangements is properly shown within the system. Next slide, please, Laura. So this details what new data items that will be within EES. So the new data items we're expecting to show will be the DPI. The DPI is currently there. However, it's been amended slightly in how it's updated, which will be via CSS. As we've talked about before, the Duos tariff ID is being added. That replaces the LLF like for like. MHHS is introducing a new market segment indicator, which indicates whether an MPAN is advanced, smart, or unmetered. There will be an annual consumption within the system and an effective from date. Alongside annual consumption will be a quality indicator, which will indicate how much of the annual consumption has been calculated using estimated or actual data. There, as we talked about with the agents are changing slightly. So there'll be a new MDR indicator, a meter data read agent, MPID, and also the DIP ID, which is the ID used for transferring flows via the DIP. And the data collector MPID will be replaced by the data service MPID. The meter manufacturer will be added into the system, and also the customer direct contract and customer direct contract metering service flag will be added. So for this is an indicator within the system over whether a data service or metering service has been contracted direct through a customer, or if it's been contracted via the supplier. The supplier, the metering service, and the DNO will all have DIP IDs added. And lastly, there'll be a flag within the system to tell you whether an MPAN has been migrated to MHHS, is still within legacy arrangements, or has reverse migrated back into legacy arrangements. And just to clarify on the data items that will no longer be present within the MHHS arrangements, the MPAN designation, which tells you if something's domestic and non-domestic, will be going and be replaced totally by the domestic premise indicator. The line loss factor class, as we talked about, will go, as will the measurement class, the meter time switch class. Because the MTCs go in, the related MTC indicator will be taken out. Data aggregators are no longer an agent within MHHS. They won't be there. Data collectors we talked about, replaced by a data service. The SMETS version is an item that has been judged to not be useful anymore, so that's been removed. The CSS supplier starter and EFD is currently used to indicate whether there's any difference between the CSS day provided to EES and also information held within the registration service or MPRS. That is being taken out because EES will now only receive the data direct from CSS, so it's not useful anymore. Energy direction is being maintained, but the effective to date and effective from date is no longer communicated to EES, so that won't be available anymore. And the connection type effective to date is also no longer being communicated, so will no longer be there. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, please. So for the migration considerations, so when an MPAN migrates, the updated data items and screen layout will be provided for MPANs that are migrated to MHHS arrangements. So the new items will become valid for that MPAN when it migrates. MPANs within the legacy arrangements will continue to have the legacy data items and screen layout displayed until such time they migrate. So the items will remain present within the system for them MPANs until they actually migrate into MHHS. If they move back from migrated to MHHS to legacy again, then the items will be repopulated through the reverse migration process. As we talked about, a new data item MHHS indicator will indicate whether an MPAN has been migrated to MHHS, is still within legacy arrangements, or will be reverse migrated. And just to confirm, MPANs that have been reverse migrated will continue to show the annual consumption of effective from data and quality indicator that was populated while the MPAN was traded within MHHS, but that will be static until it migrates back to MHHS and the item begins to be updated again. Move to the next slide, please, Laura. So the API, so what we've looked at with the APIs and when we were updating it was a number of design principles. So the new data items will be added to the end of the payload. The same file, this is really important, will be provided independent of a party's MHHS qualification. So this means that the MHHS data items and the legacy data items will all be returned within the same file. MPANs that are in MHHS will have the legacy items populated by a null, with nullified and populated with null. MPANs that are within legacy will have the MHHS data items populated with a null. The means of connecting to the API remain unchanged. As I said, items not populated for an MPAN will be provided with no values. Next slide, please, Laura. So these are the specific changes that we're looking for with the API. So all new data items present in the EES portal will be shown in the API. These will be returning queries for all MPANs and will not be populated for non-migrated MPANs. Items removed from MHHS will also continue to be returned, but will not be populated for MHHS MPANs. As such, and this is the thing we need to really want to get across, is irrespective of MHHS qualification status, all parties will receive an updated API return from M10, which is currently planned to the 7th of March 2025. The API will continue to show the most recent data items only, with the exception of MPAN relationships and associations where a history will continue to be returned. A test version of the MHHS API will be made available for MHHS SIP parties for migration testing from the 10th of June 24 and the 18th of October, between the 10th of June and the 18th of October 2024. So that test version is currently available for SIP parties going through the migration testing. All EES users will be able to test the API in parallel with MHHS UE testing from the 31st of October 2024. Any party wanting to test the access test version for the API from October should contact the CNC services direct to arrange access. And then final slide. is the API is just a final reminder that changes to the API will impact all users independent of the MHHS status or their involvement in MHHS. I think I heard a few questions coming through, so we might as well take them now.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, we've got a few. So I'll start from the top. So have CNC confirmed that they are adding the new MHHS fields to the commercial SUDS extract?
They will be contacting parties to talk through how that will work. The data items should be being added through SUDS, but as you say, that's a commercial arrangement between CNC Group and parties requesting SUDS data.
Question is, do we have J references for these so we can see the enumeration values? I have seen the API/Swagger interface, so is that now baselined or subject to further change?
The DIP files and the new data items involved in the DIP files will be moved into the energy market data specification as part of MHHS. Redlined text is going through consultation process at this moment in time. That's due to be signed off in August. The documentation is available on the MHHS website. So it is all being put together and is in final consultation as we speak. Once it's been approved, it will be made available on the REC portal as well.
Will we be able to see associated MP/ANS?
Yeah, the associated MPANs will be, as they currently are now, will be available within both the EAS and the portal. So yeah, and the API. That's the association is a pre-MHHS change, so I said that will continue as it is now.
When can non-SIT participants test the EES updates?
Yeah, that's from the end of October. As I say, if you contact CNC to arrange access to the test version of the API.
When will the removed data items be going after M15?
Yeah, okay. So the data items removed won't be present for MPANs that have migrated, as I said. They'll actually be removed from the data items and data flows, etc. totally. At M15, when we'll do a piece of work to remove any defunct data items from the code and the data specification. But that's dependent on all MPANs being migrated and the items not being used anymore.
Will the annual consumption be available on day one of migration to MHHS? If so, what will it be based on, and will it be based on the existing EAC?
Okay, so yeah, I think it depends when the file is received from Elexon. So Elexon have, and when an MPAN's migrated, they get added to a schedule for the market-wide data service to calculate the annual consumption. That'll be updated once a month, so it depends kind of what schedule it's put on in the month it gets updated. The original the original data will be based on, I believe, on load shaping, but there is a method statement within the BSC as to how they're going to calculate it. So not to speak too much on that method statement, but it's worth looking at that, and I think that's available on the MHHS website to look at.
How often will the AC be updated, and will this be available from 7th of March 2025 for all MPANs?
Yeah, okay, so it'll be updated once a month. I think we are going to show the history of the changes within the portal for a year, but only in the API, only the most recent annual consumption will be available. The annual consumption will be only available as an MPAN migrates to MHHS, so it won't be available for legacy MPANs until they migrate. And once all MPANs are migrated, it'll be available for all MPANs.
Even the other iterations of the DPI.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Laura?
Sorry. Will you be removing the other I think it might be interactions of the DPI iterations?
Iterations of the DPI. So yeah, so the DPI will only be a single data item that's updated via CSS. So the item within CSS will now be the version of the truth that is held within EAS. think that answers the question. If not, maybe worthwhile sending an email in and we'll make a look at it in more detail.
A few more left on the subject. So customer direct contract is very useful, but program is still telling B2B suppliers that we'll probably have to wait post M14 to lift these. This materially affects the ADS market segment more than anything. It also potentially precludes competitive advantage in that we cannot gain unless customer appointed agent is already qualified, or we just invoke our right to appoint our own supply agents. So it's more of a comment. I don't know if you want to feedback on that one.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the MHHF design on this is something for the program to manage, so I can't speak to the advice that they've given. EES will show the item as it's provided to us for the registration service and as it's populated by the agents. So yeah, the actual process for doing that is with the MHHS program. So I can't speak to the advice that they've been given.
Okay. Will there be some sort of check-in for when the supplier EFD date is added and the same date seems to often be populated across various fields, e.g. the energised date matches the supplier start date, but the energisation of the meter was actually as per the meter installation date? It's very misleading. Can they be stopped adding incorrect dates?
Yeah, okay, so EES doesn't validate the information it receives from MPRS. The validation of all the items is done on the MPRS side. So I think any changes to how MPRS validation is completed would need taken through the design process.
To follow up on the queries raised in this area, I understand that the topic of the existing 5-year contract for MOP in DC may be challenging to comprehend. Where can we find information on whether our clients can exit their contracts early without incurring exit fees or penalties? In relation to the MHHS programme, the nature of this change is substantial, so establishing robust procedures around DC and MOP contracts would be beneficial for market regulation and support clients throughout the transition prompted by the MHHS programme.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I understand the challenges in that area. Unfortunately, supplier contracts with agents or customer contracts with agents are out of the scope of the REC. I would say that the responsibility remains on appointing agents to suppliers, and the responsibility to make sure that the agents are able to undertake their obligations under both the REC and the BSC remains with suppliers. So as I said, I can't really comment on the contracting process. Unfortunately, and maybe that's something that needs taken up with the programme or Ofgem.
Thank you. The method statement gives us 5 quality indicators, but how do we get EAC on COS gain? What about meter consumption data after change of meter?
2 questions. So assuming the MPANs be migrated to MHHS, the annual consumption will be available within the API, so you'll be able to receive it from there prior to the gain. I believe that it's I'll need to double check, but I believe it's still, actually no, it's not. It was going to be included in the DIP flows, but I don't think it is anymore. But the data service will be able to receive that after appointment as well. On the meter consumption, I think you mean the half-hourly consumption. That's not been received by EES or any other REC service. However, I believe conversations are ongoing within the programme, so for something to take up with the programme as to how half-hourly consumption can be made available through any BSC or other means.
Is there a way to view legacy data items for MHHS migrated MPANs? This would be needed to price a reverse migration.
Yeah, so I mean, unfortunately, under the design, once an MPAN moves to MHHS, then the items are nullified. So there isn't a history of them items held within EES at this moment in time. When an MPAN migrates back, it is up to the supplier to set the new top line and which segment it's going to be in. So again, so under current design, those items are not being displayed in the EES.
Our final question is, may have already been answered, but will the AC be available for non-legacy meters too?
For non-legacy meters, so I mean, so from a metering point of view, it doesn't matter what kind of meter it is. So if it's legacy, smart, or advanced, it will be present, assuming the MPAN's been moved to MHHS. If it remains in legacy arrangements and it's not MHHS, then the annual consumption won't be available, but the EAC will continue to be available as is now.
Yeah. And thank you everybody for your questions. That was a really interactive session. So now we're moving on to the main Q&A. So if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat, and also feel free to raise your hand if you want to have a bit more of a discussion around the points that you're raising.
I think Laura, there's a question on the questions being published. I think we are expecting to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to see any hands raised either. So I think we've come to the end of the session. We've covered up all the questions. Again, so thank you for submitting them. There were some really, really good points raised. Okay, so I'll hand over to John Hawkins to wrap up.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks all for attending. I know there's a lot of information there and a lot of questions. So hopefully you've got some answers to those questions. If there are any other things there, our email address for that will come straight to the MHHS team at RECO is available there. Do feel free to follow up with us. We will be publishing a copy of the response to the questions, as well as a recording of this webinar and the slides. If there are other things, do feel free to get in touch. Brief shout out that a poll should have appeared on your screen. So if you do want to let us know how you found this and if that was useful for us, please let us know. And any feedback you give is always helpful to do that. And in terms of future engagement, we are looking at doing a bit more of an in-depth session, potentially a full-day session, really enabling us to dive into what's changing in the REC a bit later in the autumn. So again, if you have particular things on your mind that you'd find helpful to cover at a future session, do feel free to let us know in the feedback or by contacting us at the email address. And we'll look to put together relevant content that will help you in your readiness for MHHS. But that's it from us. Thank you very much for attending. I hope you found it useful and look forward to seeing you soon.